Never in the history of the world have the merchants of obscenity had available to them the modern facilities for disseminating this filth. Disseminating this filth. The onslaught of the communist masters of deceit.
Pinko, Commie, Slutz. Pinko, Commie, Slutz. Pinko, Commie, Slutz. Pinko, Commie, Slutz.
Yo, what's up?
Hello?
Hello, Steve's here too. I was just saying that I was unfortunately taking the last bites of my dessert. It was a fancy crepe, one that had a pistachio cake inside, and then it also had strawberries and walnuts. It was a lot. Yeah. The pistachio was an especially inspired choice.
Where'd you get it from? You want to get a sponsor out of this?
Yeah, the Crepe Guru, Jersey City.
Oh, that's right next to your place, right?
Pretty much.
I know that place.
So, how's everyone doing? You know, we're in the lull between the coups.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty good.
Well, by the time this comes out, the second coup will have happened.
Will have commenced.
The storm will have come.
I do want to talk a little bit about QAnon being fun again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure both of you have come across face-off conspiracy.
Oh, yeah.
And what's great about anything Q-related is that it could have been a complete shitpost joke, but some people are going to be like, this is one of the clues.
All right, you have to explain it.
So the newest kid on the block in the Q conspiracy is that, in fact, there has been a face-off situation that's occurred. Face-offs. Yes, I'm referring to the film, the cinematic classic starring John Travolta and Nicolas Cage. Two men with very different jawlines who somehow, through the magic of medical science, their faces are switched, and then I don't know what else happens. I just know the premise of the movie. So, essentially, they're saying that because a big part of the QAnon conspiracy is that, these big, typically liberal figures are going to be arrested and put to death in this, kind of grandiose, Spanish Inquisition, but for, magic pedophiles. So, because everything is, fucking not going their way, now a new theory has come forth, which is that when Trump gets arrested, it's actually Biden in a face-off situation, and that our new president, Biden, is actually Donald J. Trump. I love it.
I have a lot of confidence Trump is going to get arrested.
I know. They're just, that's really cute.
I think he already has. We haven't seen him for
Well, that's the best part of QAnon is that they'll just be like, Tom Hanks already arrested. They'll say Julia Louis-Dreyfus already put to death. They'll just make these wild claims, and they hope so bad that they'll accidentally get correct. They'll accidentally say that someone's been put to death who ends up dead. It's lovely.
That's a time-honored trope of conspiracy theories, is just throwing shit at the wall, seeing what sticks, and maybe, just maybe, something out there will be correct.
Yeah. We've got the classics out there still, too. I don't want to downplay it. We've got your false flag operations. You've got your, of course, obviously, Antifa in disguise. Those are all still out there. But I'm a fan of the face-off. What else happened this week?
Ariel Pink happened.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I have no idea who the hell that is.
I listened to one song of that person and decided it was all the worst parts of MGMT just rolled into a song.
Yeah.
Okay.
Marla, what you will get from this, which will transition into the next part of what happened this week. He's the guy in the Hauntology video for Cuck Philosophy where he's got the cowboy hat and he's considered hypnagogic pop.
Hypnagogic pop, sometimes used interchangeably with chillwave or lo-fi.
Okay.
And it's all very retro 80s. Like a combination of really deep synth music with like lo-fi emulation.
The kids love
No,
lo-fi.
I mean, I saw Ariel Pink and I was like, looks like some Elephant Six stuff. And so I stayed away from it.
Well, I think Mark Fisher was a real big fan.
Yeah, could be true.
What a betrayal.
Yeah. Now Mark Fisher canceled. Canceled.
Oh, Mark Fisher's ghost, depressed. God, he couldn't even. Oh man, that's a real bummer. Oh man, existence is not going great for old Mark Fisher. And non-existence either.
It looked like some airplanes over the sea, and I was just like, no, thank you.
Well, his music choices, as is, were just very spotty.
Yeah, no, his music choices, as is, was just. I went to a somewhat lesser-known college in England in 1994 and did a bunch of ecstasy.
Yeah, and tried to stay relevant with the kids. But the other thing that happened this week, at least to my knowledge, was the Zero Books Cuck Philosophy.
Oh, God. Yeah, I still have not listened to that, and there's no fucking way I'm going to listen to that shit. Like, I could barely stand anyone the fuck involved.
So, Doug Lane from Zero Books, who put out Mark Fisher's Capitalist Realism.
Hello, Zero Books readers.
Hello, Zero Books readers.
What does it mean to be gay with your dad? How does this relate to political correctness?
What was the joke they made about him? That they asked him if he was related to Nathan Lane and also 0 Inches Books.
Yeah, well, that's pretty good.
But he went on Cumtown and shit talk our boy Cuck Philosophy for being more popular than him.
Like, I would personally honor by remembering what the fuck he calls himself now. But
his preferred moniker.
Yeah, anyway, the artist formerly known as Cuck Philosophy, who's great and smart and one of the best fucking channels on YouTube.
That's true.
Unlike Zero Books, which sucks ass as both a YouTube channel and indie critical theory publishing house.
Yeah. And Doug Lane, I don't think any of us like. He is the epitome of...
His videos are fucking boring and uninformative.
He's the epitome of Gen X,
Yeah, which is boo.
Yeah,
gross.
boo, fuck.
What am I, 10 years old? Which is when I would be consuming Gen X media, is how I feel.
Gen X is a state of mind.
No, for sure. To me, it's very crystallized in this sort of pop culture memory for me of being around 10-ish years old and it being reality bites and, the kind of orbiting stories. Empire Records.
Yeah. There's a bunch of things in the 90s. What was that TV show with the red
High Fidelity.
High Fidelity, definitely.
Yeah.
10 times I've been gay with my dad.
It's basically search for authenticity is the general motif that's into the ground.
Which is also present in the younger generation as a fixation.
It is, but it's with less irony in Gen X, which is the thing that gets lost in translation between the generations. Doug Lane just doesn't do irony. Like the Pearl Jams and the Nirvanas and all these Gen X titans, they took themselves so goddamn seriously.
That's right. They're going to put on their fucking ad busters shoes.
And they're going to save the world.
Or just realize you can't and kill yourself.
Actually, what they're going to do is wear concert t-shirts well into them being dads and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what you do.
I just putting it out there, I'm fundamentally against any restrictions of any kind in terms of what one should wear, or etc. But I do think it's funny. Like, there was a comedy special Bill Maher put out, and it was like somebody had styled him like, he was like, yeah, this is like very cool. And it just looked like an old man in an Ed Hardy t-shirt. You know?
So Doug Lane,
At least
Doug Lane sucks and has no comedic value and has no sense of like irony or general, like, he just takes himself too seriously, and he goes on the most ironic podcast, at least that I know of, Come Town, and complains about cuck philosophy because he doesn't get as many likes or shares, and it came off as really petty and really jealous. And why would you put that out there? I just don't.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's what's been going on in my world. I don't know what else is going on in your world.
Rewatching Hey Arnold.
Okay, nice.
Helga on the Couch is one of the best examples of therapy positive media that I can think of, and probably one of the earliest examples of therapy positive media. It was a really great show.
Would you say she was the protagonist of the show?
Well, that's the thing. Hey Arnold, much unlike most kids' shows of its type, a lot of shows of that type have one-off episodes about the bully character where it's like, oh, you find out that they're poor or some shit. But with Hey Arnold, both Harold and Helga are regular main characters on the show that regularly have episodes about them. And they are the bully characters, but they're also like in the friend group in a very realistic way of like, yeah, these people are kind of assholes sometimes, but like they still hang out with us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, because that's how you are when you're kids.
Well,
someone's just like,
bullies act as these internal terrorist forces, but they're also pretty good when you have external terrorizing forces coming at you.
Yeah,
they're muscle.
Yeah, and I mean, usually in shows like that, I mean, like, you got Roger Klotz, who's just, like, a dick, and, like, you might have one episode where it's like, oh, actually, Roger Klotz's parents are divorced. There's some, like, bullshit like that. But, yeah, only with Helga and Harold do you, like, have, like, an entire fucking episode about Harold getting his bar mitzvah. Or, like, you know, you have multiple things where it's like, oh, Helga needs to do a thing with Phoebe, and they're just friends, and they have a weird dynamic. But, yeah, it's pretty great. And Helga on the Couch is a really great episode. And, like, also just, like, the fact that when I was a little kid watching the show, it didn't register with me that Helga's mom is an alcoholic. And if you're an adult watching the show now, it's incredibly, like, not even ambiguous that Helga has an alcoholic mom. And, like, the way they were able to pull that off.
I thought she was on pills.
Yeah, I mean, like, they'll switch it around, but she's clearly an addict of some kind, probably alcoholic most of all. Yeah, you know, like, when you're a little kid watching it, it's like, oh, she's goofy and kind of unreliable, and it'd be nice if Helga had a more, like, normal mom. But, like, when you're an adult watching it, it's like, oh, she's an addict.
Yeah. I feel like I did see some Hey Arnold in my older years, and that did also stand out to me. There's a lot in that show that seems pretty unambiguous looking at it as an adult.
And yeah, a more realistic way of Charlie Browning the parents out of things, where it's just like, oh yeah, they can just ride public transportation to different places.
That's always what I'm jealous of, kids who grow up in New York, both when I was a kid and now.
Yeah, it's basically that movie Kids without all the fucking and AIDS.
No, that's not where I would go. There's like a million different things. I don't know if you guys ever came across Ghost Rider on PBS.
Yeah, Ghost Rider.
I didn't have cable till I was like a full teenager.
Do we know the origin of Ghost Rider that was intended by the writers? That was implied, but there was a written but never aired episode where they were explicit about it. Do we know the origins of it, though?
Go for it.
He was Ghost Rider in his normal life was a slave boy that surreptitiously learned to read and then escaped and was hunted down and murdered.
Oh.
Like, that's like literally 100%. If you look into it, there was an episode where they were going to get explicit about that, and then they decided not to because that was depressing. But yeah, there was something in Ghost Rider where it was like mentioned that he was killed by dogs.
Yeah, I remember it's like, there is some implication that he's killed in a really violent way.
Yeah.
Like, it's...
Anyway, those were like...
You say that... Yeah, you say this, and I'm like, I feel like this was implied in some way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was super into Ghost Rider, and I loved the idea that I could be like in middle school and...
Yeah, it was murder for reading thematic reasons.
Solving mysteries with a ghost. So...
Yeah.
Also, very diverse cast.
Oh, yeah. Hey Arnold, definitely.
That's a segue. The Latino characters, the family did own a bodega. Yeah. And speaking of bodegas,
Andrew Yang.
It was kind of a bodega.
Future mayor.
I believe the owner came out and said it was a bodega.
It's arguably a bodega. It's just not. It's not an uptown. Like, it's not a round.
Yeah, it's
bodega.
not a super shitty bodega.
All right, we need to context. We need to bring context. Andrew Yang
was running for
announced he's running for mayor. Yes,
and so he released a video where he's like, "Hey, New Yorkers, I love bodegas," and like it was basically
there's this many of them.
It was basically like Donald Trump, Cinco de Mayo, talking about taco bowls or some shit, except it was bodegas.
Well, before this, he also said he left the city during the pandemic because could you imagine raising two kids in a 2-bedroom apartment
who are doing remote learning, but you live in a 2-bedroom? Which super out of touch.
Which I thought was shitty. Which is definitely out of touch because it's not relatable to a lot of people. But the funny thing is that there's a lot of pretty well off people who, for the first time in their lives, are facing that kind of real kind of adversity. And for him to be like,
really wealthy people in New York live in 2-bedrooms. Like that's the other thing where it's like it's not just like you can't be relatable to poor people. It's a lot of really well off New York people are doing that, and it's fine. They can get away with it. They work
doing the fleeing thing. They're also doing the fleeing.
Yeah, no, a lot of them are.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying there are ones that could not flee that are actually living out what Andrew Yang is so flippantly saying, who could do this? There are a subset of, in the grand scheme of things, well-off New Yorkers who are dealing with that kind of...
Or just, it's like, I don't want to move. It's not like everyone who did move out of the city.
Well, and I mean, some people, maybe they left, they went somewhere for a while, but it wasn't necessarily a permanent place. All these people are relatively fine, but there are echelons within them. I did think it was funny that it wouldn't even occur to him to like speak measuredly about this. He just kind of was like, yeah, who would do such a thing? And also a lot of his propositions I don't know if you guys looked into it. It seems like he doesn't like New York. It's like he thinks the wrong things about New York are bad and need to be improved upon. One of his proposals is to do something to attract TikTok creator hype house type things. And like, why? Also, that kind of bullshit already exists. There are places like the fucking Soho House or whatever. Like, I still keep thinking about the hype house thing. Like, I don't know what he thinks that would like bring to New York City, the biggest city in the country.
More stocks for the Chinese government. I don't know.
I wish he was working.
I know. We all wish he was the deep plant. I don't know. I'm torn because on one hand, like, I hate Andrew Yang with all of my being. He is everything about politics, specifically people who are deluded into thinking it's left politics, is wrong.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I also feel like New Yorkers knee-jerkingly skewer whoever is in the spotlight and I'm not so sure how long that skewering works.
Oh, I 100% think he's gonna win. Like, he's got this dummy fandom that they're just like kind of dopey, but they're not super loud.
I think they're loud. I think they're also. I think it really hinges on if Bloomberg goes all in for him.
I mean, definitely, I think that would make a huge difference. I also think his stupid little narrative of being like this sort of in-between person. All these dum-dums out here, they just love this shit. They, you know.
Bloomberg's candidate lost the last time.
I'm talking about, like, if Andrew Yang can solidify the funds for marketing through Bloomberg's machine. I'm not talking about, like, his endorsement or whatever. I don't think that matters so much.
Ooh, I bet Andrew Yang does something with the Sex and the City reboot.
Oh, my God. You think Cynthia's going to run again?
I was only kind of perturbed at the Sex and the City reboot sort of news because it did not bode well for my hopes for Cynthia's political aspiration. I do enjoy her as an actress in other projects.
I don't like it because that show's stupid for the sole reason that it appeals to a female audience. And they should just instead...
And they should watch the show.
Yeah, no, they should instead just, and I know that The Many Saints of Newark is coming out, but they should also just launch a new Sopranos show and everything should be Sopranos because that's a movie about guys being guys.
Well, yeah, there should just be like a bunch of Sopranos. It'll be like Sopranos of all ethnicities.
Yeah. No, like that Turkish Sopranos show.
It'll be like
what
Sopranos babies where they're in a preschool.
Oh, that would be awesome. Oh my God. And little Paulie still has like the fucking white in his hair. Oh, that's great.
Yes.
That's so absolutely. That's such a great idea. Yeah, no, definitely. And it should just be Sex and the Sopranos.
Yeah.
A bunch of women talking about how James Gandolfini is an objectively attractive man. Yeah,
that's good TV.
It's good because it doesn't involve women.
It's not TV. It's HBO. I have randomly been watching the mid-2000s show.
Oh, no.
Oh, I remember that.
What's funny is that I'm like, why? There's a lot of jokes and storylines where I'm like, why? I like to mix it up and watch a very low-stakes, dumb show.
Steel Chess is starting. It's the first Super GM over-the-board tournament in a very long time, given the COVID era.
Beautiful.
Corona had a really great opposite side castling victory as black today. So, yeah, that's happening.
That's right. That's Chess Chat with Marlo. Yeah, but we can move on to Rosa. But it is because I'm watching Cougar Town that I am drinking red wine right now.
Speaking of Cougars, Rosa fucked her friend's son.
She fucked so many people.
Yeah, well, one of those people was Clara Zetkin's kid.
Well, okay, tell the people who we're talking about.
She's your boo, Marlo.
Rosa Luxemburg.
Oh, no. German socialist from the 1910s was murdered by proto-fascists in 1919, anniversary, which just passed.
R.I.P. to a real one.
She's really great.
She started the German Communist Party. Well, she was a co-founder. I thought that was...
Yeah, okay, sure.
She was very into universal suffrage, which I'm sure we can get into. That's like a thing about her feminist lens. I watched a thing about feminism in Rosa Luxemburg, and they made a point to point out that she didn't just want women's suffrage. She was one of the early proponents of universal suffrage. She was extremely anti-war. Also didn't agree with Lenin on things, but wanted a communist future for Germany. She was Polish and then moved to
she was
Germany.
Polish. Right, yeah.
And was Jewish.
Yeah, she was like she was precocious young person, and was frequently told, like, oh, it's such a shame, all this smarts, that you're a girl.
I know she also had a limp.
Yes, she was crippled because she had to wear a cast genetically. So she was like in a crazy cast for a very long time. Yeah, but she was disabled and had a limp for life. My favorite source material for everyone listening about Rosa Luxemburg is Marlo actually introduced this to me. There's a graphic biography of Rosa Luxemburg that I really love, that I saw at Marlo's and then I ordered it myself. It's by Kate Evans. But yes, it's a really good biography of Rosa, and it's illustrated.
Red Rosa, right?
Red Rosa by Kate Evans.
She's the OG Pinko Commie slut.
Yes, for sure. And yes, she lived a pretty free life in terms of social norms. She did what she wanted.
She got what she wanted. It's a good story. Good life.
She had a life for a while. But Marlo, you're the supreme fanboy.
He calls himself a Luxemburgist.
I call myself an Orthodox Marxist, by which I mean a Luxemburgist who understands Luxemburgism isn't really a thing.
Yes. So explain.
She would generally be placed within the revolutionary faction of the Second International, along with Lenin, which often, in hindsight, a lot's made up to her specific disagreements she had with Lenin, which were actually fairly limited. And by and large, she would be in the anti-reformist revolutionary faction along with him at the time.
I feel like they had a respectful relationship.
Yeah, they, for the most part, did. There's a famous piece by Trotsky defending her, which is why you have... I always say the biggest issue with Rosa Luxemburg is all her English translators are Trotskyists.
We don't like them.
Yeah, whatever. They're just the only ones doing it, and they tend to be opinionated. They mostly disagreed on the national question specifically, and a few organizational differences that might broach accusations of slight authoritarianism on Lenin's part. But yeah.
What do you mean by Orthodox Marxist?
I generally disagree with certain ideas that came with post-Lenin Marxism, specifically to do with national liberation and nationalism. Also tend to have a idea of socialism that centers around there being an implicated withering away of capitalism more so than the way socialism tends to get defined in Leninist circles. But yeah, that just tends to be where I land. And I tend to really like Rosa Luxemburg, and I read her a lot. I don't know that there's a coherent idea of Luxemburgism.
Right. I said that flippantly, only because she seems to be your favorite. Mm-hmm. But this week we're going to be looking at reform or revolution. Or is it social reform or revolution?
I don't know.
Either way, it's a big, long shitpost. So for all you shitposters out there, it's a really good shitpost. It's a long shitpost. Imagine this on Facebook. Just paragraphs of this guy sucks, which it really is. It attacks the ideas of Edward Bernstein's revisionism and calling on Marlo. Can you define revisionism?
So Edward Bernstein was a part of a growing school within socialist circles at the time that basically argued that despite Marx's predictions, capitalism did not really contain within itself seeds of its own collapse, and that the socialists should work more and more on winning quality of life reforms for the working class and not really worry about overthrowing capitalism, which would possibly just come about from continual reforms won legislatively by socialists.
Was there a reason he would think that capitalism wouldn't collapse?
He wanted
I mean, a continued expansion and seeming stability of capitalism.
Right, and that was sort of the answer, was that the original, Bunny's correct, but also the original thesis was that capitalism goes through a crisis or a collapse every 5 to 10 years. And I think when he wrote it in 1898, what she's responding to, there hadn't been a major crisis since like 1876, I think, or 1877. And so there had been 20, 30 years of expansion. Those were good times for growth under capitalism, and there didn't seem to be a real depression. So yeah, there was something like 15, 20, 25 years of nothing you could really point to saying, oh, this is a crisis. Therefore, there was a conclusion that, oh, Marx must be wrong because he said in his Scientific Socialism that capitalism would collapse periodically. And I think that probably led to why he thought what he thought.
Yeah, it was also a time where you had large expansions of particularly the German Socialist Party, and you had essentially people who were making career politicians within the Socialist Party.
Yeah.
And us could see, well, maybe this is the happy medium we want.
Well, yeah, incrementalism's always got its appeal, especially if anything happens, right? Any change happens, it makes it seem more realistic that an incrementalist or a within approach is possible. For a lot of people in the States, just the election of Barack Obama signaled to them that, all this change is possible, and then...
Well, also, the irony of that is that capitalism had gone through a crisis right then. That's our last crisis of capitalism, was the 2007, 2008 crash. People are saying that, coronavirus is the next.
I mean, this is a pretty strong crisis right now.
Right. But people aren't throwing themselves out of windows yet, although they're just dying in mass. But like the financial sector is stable or going up. So by that measure, the crisis is almost incubated. People are still saying it's going to collapse. Everyone, every day of my life is saying, when is it going to crash? When is it going to crash? This is a bubble. This is a coronavirus bubble. We need to prepare for the crash, but the crash hasn't come yet.
Yeah.
People were saying. Bernstein,
many people were saying.
Was, in Rosa's words, being an opportunist. And I think that's when we can probably go into the text itself.
Yeah.
I had one question, which I think should be a running thing, but who is Bernstein? Not like back then. We kind of went over who he was then, but who is our Bernstein? Which I think will help us discuss Rosa's response to him. And I think if we look at what Rosa critiques about Bernstein, we could probably see some analogs or similarities between people who we discuss.
Yeah, you don't want to put too much stock in over metaphorizing history.
No, this is a teaching technique. This is a way for people to relate to this. This, I mean,
arguably in theory, he's pretty much the entirety of what would be considered mainstream socialism in the U.S. right now.
Right. That's what I want to get to, is he is today's far left progressivism or Justice Democrat or their theory of why go with us and not destroy things in the street. Vote for us. We'll bring about the changes you want.
Which it should be noted also that Rosa Luxemburg was also, quote unquote, electoralist. She was helping run the largest political party in Germany at the time. We have these arguments today that are not really similar, because you have this do you vote or do you not vote? And it's like, everyone voted. at the time.
Well, no, I brought up she's a universal suffrage.
Yeah,
Like
no,
that.
absolutely.
She saw that as a revolutionary thing.
Right.
But what she didn't see as revolutionary is what she attacks Bernstein for. She's like, lists off these things throughout this paper, which are eloquent, sick Bernsteins. Well, she calls him,
yeah.
I've written them down here. She calls him an opportunist, an idealist, a revisionist, and a utopian. And according to Rosa, this is my note, so this revisionism doesn't take into account the anarchy of capitalism, which she says multiple times throughout this text that there's this anarchy of capitalism, which I think gets into what we described before, which was the collapse. Like capitalism is anarchistic and it is predetermined to collapse eventually.
Yeah, because it's inherently unstable.
She attacks him for rejecting the collapse theory, rejecting scientific socialism, materialism, and rejects the inner contradictions within capitalism. That sounds so familiar.
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, I think this really drives the point. Legislative reform and revolution are not different methods of history.
What's the page?
Well, it would be part 2, section Conquest of Political Power, which she also includes a fun little slam of, it has been known for a long time that the petty bourgeois reformer sees good and bad sides in everything. Yeah, where she says legislative reform and revolution are not different methods of historic development that can be picked out at pleasure from the counter of history, just as one chooses hot or cold sausages. Legislative reform and revolution are different factors in the development of class society. They condition and complement each other and are at the same time reciprocally exclusive, like North and South poles of bourgeois and proletariat. So you don't want to be too reductive in the idea that, you know, she only saw street action as valid or things like of that nature.
I'm not saying that.
No, I'm not saying you are. I think it's worth emphasizing.
Well, yeah, that's definitely like where people would put the dynamics thinking from today's point of view. So it's often how people want to present a binary about today's world, but again, not the same world. She hadn't gotten to see how fucking bullshit all the elections were.
Yeah, that's the problem. She didn't see how terrible the elections.
She thought that, you know, universal suffrage, like bing, bang, boom, there you go. Many people, I don't think, realize the lengths and cleverness involved in what would become regular electoral practice, wherever it may be.
So she talks a lot about the adaptations that Bernstein makes. That reform is an attempt to adapt capitalism until it's socialism. And I find this also very prescient, but I also recognize that there is a gulf of time where these adaptations were kind of new. The adaptations that she lists are credit and employers' organization, which is cartels. So like extrajudicial rogue companies not attached to any state.
Well, I mean, the argument with cartels was it was an organization of distribution that was moving away from a pure free market system that was developing within capitalism itself. So the argument Bernstein was making was the market would eventually disappear under capitalism, so you don't need necessarily a revolutionary socialist to centralize production and distribution.
Well, and did he just think it was an inevitability, like nothing would be in place to maintain it? It would just... I'm always fascinated by this idea that it would like naturally fall away. Was it still unclear that there would be some people who would see to it?
So this is like the weed dealer argument, that if only all capitalism were like weed dealers. No, that's probably not true. If only thing
If only
it
everything
worked on
were
a black
like weed
market
dealers.
outside of centralized capitalism or Bitcoin.
So to kind of put some things in context, her use of anarchic can be very much associated where she's actually directly just talking about a free market system, that there's no guiding centralized distribution, and she names that as a problem with capitalism, and she refers to that as anarchic, which is common of socialists at that time.
Yeah, because anarchy sucked.
It wasn't necessarily
it was totally saying anarchists, you suck.
Yeah, it was nothing to do with anarchism. Like, she'll insult anarchism as a political ideology.
It was like, stop blowing stuff up,
good Charlotte.
Little bitches.
You're Charlotte. Good Charlotte.
Good charlatan.
She'll make it clear she's actually insulting anarchism, which she does occasionally. But in this case, it was more just literally talking about the free market.
Yeah, and that's what I said before, that according to Rosa, this revisionism doesn't take into account the anarchy of capitalism, which is the free market of capitalism being in a collapse and rebuilding.
And Bernstein's argument is essentially that self-regulation of the market to the point of the eventual disappearance of the market will come about by economic necessity, as capitalists will be increasingly tired of, collapses and stuff occurring from the free market, so they'll themselves organize distribution outside of a free market. So a cartel would be an association of distributors that organize across the sector to set prices and supply points. So that was what Bernstein's argument was there.
I read it as that Bernstein wanted to suppress credit and suppress cartels.
No, he was definitely saying that credit and cartels was a thing that will essentially make capitalism not go away, but at the same time be a standard by which eventually socialism will develop out of capitalism.
Okay, so it's the standard, not a point of suppression.
Yeah,
and the way it seemed that he wanted to organize socialism, and she kind of lists it here, there's 4 things that I listed: labor unions, parliamentary practice, co-ops, and democracy? ? I mean, it seems like that's linked with parliamentary practice, but one might be party organizing and democracy writ large, which it seems like Rosa argues against. She definitely argues against labor unions.
And I mean, again, she views all these things as essential to establishing socialism. She just doesn't believe that they will themselves, outside of revolutionary activities, simply morph into a socialist society.
Okay.
And I mean, she mentions it in the introduction where she talks about, of course, socialists are for reforms. I mean, she was organizing labor unions at the time she was writing this. She was organizing the SPD political party and running campaigns as she was writing this. She would have freaking ran if women were allowed to do so at the time.
Yeah, she was kind of like anything and everything. She was doing it. But she had some more specific criticisms of assuming that things would naturally foment.
So, I mean, the idea, again, that, for example, that Bernstein was pushing is that labor unions, they, through their struggle, take decisions out of capitalist hands. They say, oh, you can't lower our pay or we'll go on strike. So the capitalist no longer has the opportunity to lower pay. And eventually they'll build on that power more and more until the capitalist becomes superfluous, is what Bernstein was arguing, which she specifically said would not happen. I mean, specifically with labor unions, she mentioned that they were at best defensive and served a pedagogic function for showing workers how to organize for material interests and showing them that they have material interests, but that a labor union struggle is not in itself a revolutionary struggle to seize power for the proletariat.
It seems like she takes issue with him using it as an education tool. She says, Bernstein here, at present, the trade union struggle and parliamentary practice are considered to be the means of guiding and educating the proletariat in preparation for the task of taking over power. From the revisionist standpoint, this conquest of power is at the very same time impossible or useless, and therefore trade union and parliamentary activity are to be carried out on by the party only for their immediate results, that is, for the purpose of bettering the present situation of the workers, for the gradual reduction of capitalist exploitation, for the extension of social control.
So, first of all, keep in mind, when she calls them revisionists, the implication is when she says at present, that means unrevised, as we, my side is the correct side that we've always gone with. So at present, my side is that the union exists primarily as an educational tool for teaching the proletariat how to exercise and seize power. The revisionists view... the revisionists view the seizure of power by the proletariat to be useless because they view revolutionary struggle as useless, and therefore they view the point of the union as only what the union is in itself doing, i.e., protecting wages, threatening strikes over conditions, etc. So in Luxemburg's view, when a union goes on strike to protect, to protest factory conditions, the point isn't so much, and this is what Zizek gets into a little bit with her, it isn't so much to protest those factory conditions or to have those conditions improved. It's to teach the proletariat that they can act unified, and they could also do this to seize power at some point.
Yeah, I believe she argues that she doesn't negate the merits of voting and organizing, but I believe at some point she compares them to a Sisyphean task. It's our old buddy Sisyphus. He's just pushing a boulder up a hill. It comes back down. You got to do it again. Hilarious. So she's sort of appreciating that it's a sort of struggle on accomplishing the goals there, but the value it has to organize and educate people about
by way of
what it is.
You notice how the boulder keeps rolling down the hill when you do this? You should do something else. Like, that's honestly, and they can't learn that they should do something else until they see the boulder rolling down the hill a bunch of times. So that's one. And again, it's, this is what we get into and what Zizek, again, gets into, that she mentions of this idea that failure is necessary for success, so we shouldn't be afraid to fail. Okay, to quote, "It's impossible to avoid the premature conquest of state power by the proletariat, precisely because these premature attacks against state power are in themselves important historic factors in helping to provoke and determine the point of a definite victory. Considered from the viewpoint of the idea of premature conquest of power by the laboring class appears to be a political absurdity derived from the mechanical conception of the development of society, and positing for the victory of class struggle point outside than independent of the struggle." So, basically, in order to get to a point where we have a successful revolution, we will need to have had an unsuccessful revolution or two. The socialist transformation
so let's get
supposes a long in the course of which it is probable the proletariat will be repelled more than once, so that for the first time, from the viewpoint of the final outcome of the struggle, it would have looked like power was seized too
Which is
early.
why the second coup is going to work.
Yeah, no, I mean, possibly. Yeah, sure. It's never a failure until you succeed, and then it's, in hindsight, a failure.
Right. Or it's, in hindsight, just a stepping stone to success. Like a failed attempt to take over the government on Tuesday is a successful stepping stone to a successful takeover of power on Friday.
Yeah, sure. You just got to win that game of Red Rover against the riot cops.
Now there's 25,000 more of them. There's one point where she says that trade union and parliamentarian politics is separate from social reform, and therefore its development is in opposite directions.
I mean, she talks about the contained. So, for example, she gets into how trade unions specifically argue for the suppression of like labor-saving technology because that cuts down on working hours. And I mean, she mentions in her argument there that there are, in fact, reactionary elements that necessarily exist within those struggles. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you need to work outside those struggles to ultimately win power for the proletariat.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you're going to have to. You, the listener, are going to have to square the fact that there are reactionary elements.
You know, trade unions protect their workers by driving up wages. That in turn drives up prices for customers who are also workers. You know, and there's like these sort of inherent contradictions that come along with that, which she talks about in discussing the limits of that struggle. But she by no means was anti-union or
organizing.
Yeah.
She did seem to have anti-populism, or at least anti-popularization of socialism, which, as someone who follows and has lots of opinions about populism, I think this was a really key paragraph. Here too, the theocratic base of his economic error is his popularization of socialism. For this is what he does. By transporting the concept of capitalism from its productive relations to property relations, and by speaking of simple individuals instead of speaking of entrepreneurs, he moves the question of socialism from the domain of production into the domain of relations of fortune. That is, from the relations between capital and labor to the relation between poor and rich.
Yeah, she's very good.
But what does that mean? That's a really succinct way of cutting down a lot of the arguments that I hear about progressive reform, that it merely is just making poorer people richer. That's all that socialism has as its like horizon of possibility. The only horizon it has is making people, helping poor people to become slightly less poor. But so what does that mean? Like the relation between labor and capital, why is that different than poor and rich? Which, you know, is 101 Marxism, but I think it bears repeating.
Right. So the idea is Marxism is largely unconcerned with the idea of how much money you might have, and it, you know, more sees the relationship between capital and labor as objectively and inform exploitative by its very nature of its relationship, and not simply because some people make more money than other people. And it's a popular thing to skip over that and just try and make it a rich versus poor thing.
Yeah, and then give poor people $1,000 and call it socialism, and then run into a bodega and wave around some green tea. Yeah.
Buy 2 green tea.
Or, sorry, not socialism. Capitalism with a human face.
Yeah, capitalism with a human face. Just like I don't eat anything with eyelashes because I'm So nice. That's the thing people used to say. Like, they weren't like quite vegetarian or vegan, but there was like some stipulation on not eating an animal who had eyelashes, which I guess is pigs and cows.
Yeah.
Of the typical meats. Goats got some lashes sometimes. You're in the birds. That's it.
Well, I mean, I'm
shellfish.
fairly certain normal fish don't have eyelashes.
Oh, and the fish. Look, just because I
fish called
imagine
Wanda?
them as drawn
Just because you imagine them as like a weirdly sexy fish that is in some Looney Tunes thing.
No, the sexy fish in Shark Tale, which is voiced by Angelina Jolie. Yeah, she's got big lips too. Some nice
Looney
lashes
Tunes
and lips.
made me view the perfect woman as a hastily made coyote mannequin that has a giant wick coming out that is slowly burning down to a large pack of TNT.
Oh, for some, it's a cross-dressing Bugs Bunny. So,
do you know that Coyote and Roadrunner was originally like meant to be a parody of Tom and Jerry? Yeah, it was like, oh yeah, you know how like Tom and Jerry's sometimes a little silly and doesn't care about the laws of physics. Let's just amp that up to 11, and also let's make it a Coyote and a Roadrunner, which are two things you've never fucking heard of and have no idea whether they have an antagonistic relationship. It was like a joke originally.
Acme Corporation.
That's right. And you know what? He wasn't eating carrots. He ate celery in the original. The voice actor who did Bugs Bunny.
I mean, it does sound like
could not eat
difficult
carrots.
to make the sound.
It's a whole thing because sound for movie and TV is its own thing. It's got this lovely effect that, I don't know about you guys, but the first time I was like an older person and a real full-on fight happened in front of me, I remember being struck by the utter lack of sound effect. Like, a real fight is always grosser to me because it just sounds so squishy. Yeah, there's no like finesse there. It's just like, don't like it. Just meaty max. But what I love is that there's so many sounds that we don't even realize we've probably engaged with primarily via a movie or a TV show. When we come upon it in real life, we're like, oh, is that what that sounds like? It's interesting. There's a great sketch in the 90s, I think at an MTV Movie Awards, where it was Janine Garofalo and Ben Stiller, and they were playing sound effects people. Basically, the gist of it is they would use unusual things to get the sounds.
Oh yeah, no,
but that is
I
what they do.
know about Foley artists. Nickelodeon always had like you always saw like a little special with the Foley artists, and it's like,
that's right.
I'm like slapping a watermelon to make.
My first experience having that curtain drawn away from my eyes was when I got to see Garrison Keillor in person. He touched me in ways I still haven't recovered from.
Oh my God. I remember when The Onion as a bit had a Garrison Keillor sex scandal, and then that literally happened. That was funny.
Yeah, but they had a Foley guy there to do all the radio skits.
Well, I mean, there's also
the Prairie
like
Home
very famously Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That's a primary plot point.
Yeah, but that's when they like broke the fourth wall and then kept the fourth wall as the only wall, which is different than somebody on stage telling you, oh, there's horses coming, and then seeing the guy with the coconut doing it, which is, you know, different levels of simulation here. Are we done with Rosa?
We're just doing rants.
Just doing rants. Well, she had some good rants. My favorite is when she called him a virgin.
Wait, where's that? Yeah, no, I think I know what you're talking about now. I think she was calling, like, socialism a virgin, a maiden on her wedding night or some shit.
Oh, yeah. He is, to use Marx as an illustration, like the foolish virgin who had a child who was only very small.
Weird. Yeah.
It's after in other words, he refuses to see a great deal of the anarchy of capitalism. He sees only little of it. He is, to use Marx's illustration, like the foolish virgin who had a child who was only very small. Foolish virgin.
Foolish virgin.
Bernstein is the incel virgin to Rosa Luxemburg's Pinko, Commie, Slut.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, watch Hey Arnold, everyone. Show's good.
Yeah. Hey Arnold is good. I'm sure we will return to Rosa at another point. Reform and Revolution. You can read it for free online. Highly, again, recommend the graphic biography. I love it. And yeah, I guess we'll see.
It's a brewing.
If another coup is it's a brewing. I think
that
they said they're going to do satellite
the
coups.
icing on the James Bondian cake.
By satellite coups, do you mean like coups in other state capitals? Like,
I thought it was like an anonymous type of crash of the entire infrastructure by which we rely upon in the internet.
Or like space fights, like that one two-parter of Archer.
Yes. I have a whole rant about vigilantism, because I saw one of my least favorite things about this was people were like, back the blue. These people are fighting the cops. And me being like, no, part of fascism is vigilantism, and cops are really into being vigilantes, and that means fighting other cops. Literally, like, just most of Law and Order episodes are them just arguing which is better at exacting justice and how the government bureaucracy hurts their ability to catch the correct black person.
Bye.
Marlo's going back to bed.
Yeah, no, I don't know what it is.
He's going back to bed, and I had one of those yesterday. I just went to bed real early. That's right. That's good. We'll see.
Would it be funnier if it was
Cougar Town?
I don't know. Something about the coup, but also Cougar Town.
Yeah. Is that why I watched it?
You're
was
like,
I
need to find things with this one syllable.
It might have been.
Cuckoo, ka-choo, cuckoo, ka-choo.
Cougar Town, and there's no one. I could have been watching One Flew Over the Cuckoo's
Beatles
Nest.
montage.
Yeah, it's just like
there's more.
Weird time in television in the mid-2000s where it's like, yeah, you could just watch like Tommy's Mom's a MILF on like Nickelodeon and shit. Like they were just obsessed with those concepts.
Yeah. Well, like Cougar Town is like, it's a show that started out as like, oh yeah, we're going to play on this cougar thing. And then they were like, oh, we made these characters that people are kind of into. So we're like doing this show, but it kind of has nothing to do with cougars at all anymore. Yeah, it's kind of strange, but there's like a ton of problematic jokes that I am like, oh, that's interesting that was just 2012 that these jokes were made. Yeah,
you could say the R word.
That's right. That's pretty much it. It's pretty much it, guys. All right.